Jesse on fire. I wake up this morning, I got a message from him. All he says to me is, hey, have you seen this? And it's a screenshot of a tweet put out by Brett Okamoto. And Brett said, I'm going to do my best. I'm off of memory here, but he says, Nate Diaz is going into the fight promotion business, top level kickboxing, MMA, and grappling. Nate Diaz will be applying for his promoter's license soon. That's it. There's your cliffhanger. Now, where do you want to start on this, guys? Because we probably saw this coming, didn't we? I mean, the talk of Nate versus Jake Paul that was absolutely everywhere, and this is why Nate's hurrying through his contract, and this is why Nate wants to get done. If we do a little bit more research on that, we created that. Nate never told us that. Neither did Nate's coaches or managers. Neither did Jake Paul or his trainers or managers. We did that. And Nate weighed in on it and said, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, Nate would have every right to say he's not going to do that and get a little talk going. I understand those things, but in fairness, that's not how Nate does things. When Nate tells you no, he's telling you no. And when he tells you yeah, he's telling you yeah. And I don't care if this one gets ran back or not. This is not like his integrity's on the line. I'm just sharing for you. It stood out for me. Go, well, wait a minute. I thought that was done. I thought these two were boxed. I thought this is what this whole thing was about. Where did I get that? I had to sit and I had to think for a minute. I go, I got that from you guys. You guys got that from me. We created that. That was never actually told to us. Okay, then what is Nate's plan? Where is Nate going? What is this big hurry? I mean, Nate went on Ariel's show and said he was offered Conor McGregor and that he turned it down. Red Panty Night is still very real. And it was 2 days later, it comes out, the announcement who his next opponent's going to be Chimaev. So Nate's getting on with it for something. If it's not going to be the Jake Paul thing, we weren't left with a whole lot of options other than he was going to go into the promotion business. Now, quietly, Nate has surrounded himself with some very successful people. And Gilbert has spoke about this. Gilbert Melendez has spoke a couple of times, and I think it just kind of buzzed over people's head, but you could go out and find it. And Gilbert has spoke about a lot of the successes that Nate has had off camera. So he's just got good people around. That's all that I'm sharing with you. And if they want to go in a direction, he thinks that he can put a fight promotion together. Let's guess what that would look like. Now, we didn't have very many details from this tweet. High-level kickboxing, high-level MMA, high-level grappling. Okay. I'm interested. Sounds very similar to what One Championship is doing. Where are we going to go from here? Now, if I was to guess, if somebody was to come in and go, Chael, how are you going to do this, right? You have event planners and then you have promoters. What's the difference? Well, the difference is one has multiple dates. That would be the distinguishing definition of are you a promoter or are you an event planner? There are some very big events that have happened. I could name for you some very big fights over history, and you go, wow, yeah, that's a big fight. Yes, I've heard of that one. Yes, I saw that one. Yes, I remember where it was. I could do that, but then I could also come in and tell you who put them on. And you say, what? And it wouldn't be who you think. So event planning can be okay. But if you're a promoter, you're a storyteller. The only way you can tell a story is if you have multiple dates, right? You guys understand the difference? If you have a 4-part series, part 3 is going to be predicated on what was told in part 2, which was predicated on what was told in part 1. So if I was to give some advice, see, I like promoting. I don't like event planning. I've been on both sides. I didn't like planning events. That's just personal. I liked to tell a story. I like to have a reason that we're doing this, which is going to lead to another reason. I like that. Doesn't make me right. And in many ways, if somebody was to attack this business, which is very, very hard for many, many different reasons. But if they were to do that, if they get all the things in place, number one of which would be distribution, that's going to be the hard one. But if you've got it, boy, you got something there. You got some ends and you can break into this business with distribution. Wow, you've done something there. But I would encourage you, and I wouldn't have done this a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, I tell you, you better be a promoter. You better be a storyteller. You better use plan A for plan B to get you to C and D, E and F. That's what I would tell you. Right now, I'm not sure that I would. I think I would go the other route. I think I would be an event organizer. I would do one event. I would find just the right date and just the right location with just the right guys. I'd pop the popcorn. I'd pour the beer. I'd set up the tent. I mean, I would do the whole thing. But it would be one event. I would then take that. I'd take my oars out of the water. I would make no commitment. I would do no long-term contracts. That's risky. I mean, there's a risk on both sides of it, but I have seen a number of people get in MMA, and I've seen them just go too hard, too fast. If you heard of a guy named Mark Cuban, just for fun, but if you heard of a guy named Mark Cuban, because see, the business side of MMA is absolutely fascinating. And some people really study. They see what draw, they see what works, they see what comments get you over, they see what personalities and gimmicks and what that will do for you. Other guys, this is straight up competition. If I'm going to get to the top, I'm going to beat 15 men in front of me. If that doesn't get me to the top, then by God, I'm going to beat 17 men in front of me. I mean, there's some, okay, you do your theory, I'm going to observe this theory, but if you study the business of MMA, it's wildly fascinating, not to mention the UFC specifically this year, because 2022 Dana White and 2001 Dana White do not get along. They are not in the same room together, right? They sit down for lunch, they both walk out on the other one and think the guy's a fool. I mean, it's very, very, very different what they're doing. Okay. Mark Cuban. You guys have heard of him. Great. Mark Cuban was in the fight business. Are you aware of that? Mark Cuban owns a basketball team called the Dallas Mavericks. Now, so he goes to Dallas, puts on an MMA show. This was way back many years ago, and Cuban comes in, he's got a sweatshirt, he's got his hat on, starts walking around the crowd. He just starts asking, hey, what do you think of the event? And guy tells him what he thinks, and he moves on over and says, hey, guys, you having a good time? What do you think of the event? He starts getting feedback from the fans. So Cuban goes back in, he sits down, he's putting all this data together. He's going to come out, he's going to take on the UFC, he's going to make this big wave. He loves MMA, he sees this as the future. Stops everything. He calls Las Vegas, he writes a check, and he buys a little piece of the UFC. He realizes this is the better way to do it because I got to start slow. I cannot start massive. I cannot start eye to eye with them. That just isn't sustainable. I've got to start here and I've got to grow it out, or I can go do the other things that I'm doing and I can still be part of the action. Now, but that's an interesting story because there's another guy I'd like to ask you if you've heard of. His name is Jim Carrey. When I was growing up, Jim Carrey was the funniest thing the world had ever seen. Now, that of course is very debatable, but he was big. And he made faces, and he did voices, and he did impressions, and he was over, and his theaters were packed. And the biggest quote in Hollywood at that time was his quote, and it was 20 million per picture. Jim Carrey, somewhere along the way, decides he's going to tell the audience what they like. He decides he's not the funny faces, he's not the funny voices and personalists. He's going to be a serious actor, and that's how you guys are going to accept me. And that's why I had to start this whole conversation with, have you ever even heard of Jim Carrey? Because most of you, the answer is no. And Steve Carell is on the fast track to that. Steve Carell is Michael Scott, but he wants to come out and tell you that he's something different. And the theaters are bombing, and his quote sucks, and it deserves to. He picks the world's worst scripts. He goes out and does a good, solid performance every single time. His scripts suck. I don't mean they're bad. I don't mean they're okay. He is the king of... You guys ever seen Narnia? Have you ever even heard of it? You ever seen SpaceX? Have you ever even heard of it? I mean, these are colossal disasters. You gotta be very careful what you pick. Meanwhile, I could ask you an interesting question. Have you ever heard of Jake Paul? And Jake Paul was a guy who had an audience. He built an audience, and he got them to come along to something else. It's extremely rare. Britney Spears would love to be an actress. She is massively popular, but unless she's holding a microphone, it's just not what her crowd wants to see. I could use that same example with a guy that I always enjoyed, Roy Jones Jr. Roy was a great boxer. He had great sponsorships. He's doing a great job. He's the world champion. The Jordan brand brought him on, but he decided he wanted to be a rapper. Some of you probably don't even know that, or you think that I'm teasing right now. Shaquille O'Neal was a wonderful basketball player, went on to be a very successful announcer. He also wanted to be a rapper. Garth Brooks is possibly the biggest entertainer of my life. He wanted to now be known as Chris Gaines. You guys will have to Google that because you'll think I'm making this up. There are colossally bad decisions that are made by people. So if Nate is getting into the fight business, I'm simply asking, what would that look like? Who is he looking to take on? And everybody is instantly going to think, I need to go out there and I need to get the biggest guy. Whoever the best guy is, whoever has the best guys, whoever has the best talent is going to be the biggest promotion. Really? Were you watching something called the UFC when they were kicked off of pay-per-view? They were kicked off of pay-per-view, the story goes, because the president of DirecTV's wife didn't like it. Do you know who the headliners were? I'm not going to be a jerk, but do you know who the champions were? Back then, I'm not looking to be a jerk and out people. But they stayed at number one. So it's your ability to tell compelling stories. And while the whole world wants to say you have to have the absolute best fighters, so people go out there and they're writing checks. Well, these fighters don't want to come on a one-off. $1 million is good money. I can get that 5 different places, but I can't get $1 million commitment for 3 fights, regardless if I win or lose. And all of a sudden you're broke because you're trying to plan these different dates. It's a really, really tough business. And I would just encourage, if you were to come in it right now, consider being an event planner. Consider doing one thing. And there are people and access, there are favors that Nate Diaz could have off of a Rolodex that would cost anybody else tens of millions of dollars. Truly. Truly. I don't want to fight anybody. I'll just use myself. If Nate asks, it's a different conversation. You're doing a favor? Favor is a totally different deal. You got a friend that needs a favor? You're having a totally different conversation than you would in a business approach. For one night. You need the favor twice. Now we need to start having a different conversation. I'm just sharing with you. It'd be very interesting what that looks like. I would be very curious. There's a name of the promotion so far. And within Okamoto's tweet that was sent to me by Jesse, it said that he'll be applying for his license soon. I will be curious where that is. I will assume that it's California. But it'll be very telling. And what's that card going to look like? And what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you find there's a card and it has Nick and Nate Diaz on the same card? What if it was Nick and Nate Diaz and they were taking on Jake and Logan Paul? I mean, I'm just sharing with you by example. There's a lot of fun that you can have. And there's plenty of favors that will come to the table one time. But the general concept, put on a whole bunch. To start spreading it out. Well, you start showing your cards. You start telegraphing, right? I mean, this is the fight business. You either learn something in the gym or you don't. You start putting out multiple dates. There start to become the called counter programming. There's a lot of things that can be done. Instead, if you collect, you save up your money and you attack one time and then you wait and do it again. I'm just sharing for you. The business side of this is fascinating. I'm sure Nate is going to do great. I'm curious what that's going to be. I look forward to watching it, but it's an entire discussion. And the Mark Cuban example is one that isn't known by a lot of people, but I think that hearing it, I think that you would have learned something.